Hello and welcome to the Martial Arts Teaching Tactics Podcast. I'm Chris Bean and I'm joined by Chris Kent. Hello, Mr. Kent.
Hello, sir.
Today we're going to do kind of a deep dive into memory, both short-term, long-term memory. We're going to touch on working memory as well. We're going to try to relate this and try to come up with some key tactics that we can use to leverage and help our students to retain their information, moving their moves from their short-term memory through their working memory and onto their long-term memory. Getting their students to, of course, know and rehearse and remember these moves is vital. That's key to what we're doing. If we are teaching classes but nobody's actually learning the moves, if they're not committing those moves to their long-term memory, then they're going to continue to stay in one place. They're not going to advance. They're not going to progress. They're stuck, right? So we want to prevent that from happening. And in doing research for this, today we're going to look specifically at the multi-story model of memory, which was developed by Richard Atkinson and Richard Schefren. We're going to first go over some information regarding short-term memory. Short-term memory has the duration of up to about 30 seconds, right? That's an awfully short time, up to 30 seconds. And it has the capacity to hold about 7 items, plus or minus 2, depending on the person. So you can hold 7 items in your short-term memory for up to about 30 seconds, and depending on who you are, you might be plus or minus 2 items. And this information mainly encodes, or you mainly hear about this information acoustically, using your ears. You listen to this. And information is generally lost or displaced through decay. Maintenance rehearsal is the process of verbally or mentally or physically repeating or going over the information, which allows that duration of short-term memory to be expanded beyond 30 seconds. An example of maintenance rehearsal would be, you remember a phone number for long enough to make that phone call, and then once you're on the phone call, you're not thinking about that phone number anymore. You're not saying those numbers over and over again. So by the time the call is done, it's very likely going to last longer than 30 seconds. That phone number is gone. Now it's in your phone. You have it maybe written down somewhere, but it's gone. Right? It's not in your short-term memory anymore, and you didn't convert it to long-term memory, so it's not there anymore. This type of rehearsal, saying it over and over again, or doing it over and over again, or hearing it over and over again, usually, again, involves repeating the information without thinking about its meaning or connection to larger information. So taking the example of the phone number, you are saying, whatever the phone number is, you're saying the numbers. You're doing it just for the sake of remembering those numbers in that pattern so you can push them in and hit phone or hit call. Then they're gone, right? You're not connecting them to anything else. They're just there. They're isolated in that one area. Continual rehearsal regenerates or renews that information, making it longer. So each time you say that phone number, that 30-second window restarts. You say the phone number, okay, that 30-second window restarts over and over again. But as soon as you stop, then that 30-second window starts, and you close in, and that 30 seconds is gone, so is that information. And for some people, maybe it's shorter than 30 seconds. And again, for some people, I'm sure it would be a little bit larger than 30 seconds. But you have about 30 seconds for that short-term memory. Short-term memory, again, refers to active recognition, right? That's like you're keeping things in mind, like that phone number we talked about. The information is not really accessible from your environment. So unless you have it written down on a Post-it note, somebody probably told you that phone number. You're, okay, I'm going to say these numbers over and over again so I can, okay, call. Now the 30-second window started. By the time you start talking, those numbers are out the window. Working memory can be thought of kind of an in-between. So you have short-term memory, there's working memory, and then long-term memory. Working memory is the in-between the short-term memory and the long-term memory. And working memory really allows us to memorize information that we're going to use later to complete a task. And so maybe this is like, hey, I have to remember when I go to the grocery store, I have to get milk, right? And so you put that in kind of in your working memory, not quite in a short-term memory because you need to know it to complete the task of going shopping later, right? You need to be able to remember to get the milk. So that's kind of in your working memory. Of course, that's a really crude and basic example of that. But working memory, again, is the in-between short-term memory and long-term memory. And working memory really is information that we memorize that we will later use to complete a task. Moving on to long-term memory. Long-term memory has unlimited capacity and duration. And it encodes information semantically. So it gives that information meaning. So you partake information and those numbers from that phone number, then you give meaning to, this is John's phone number. I need to remember John's phone number. So you are relating that information to meaning, to John, right? You assign that kind of a property in your head to help you assign meaning to what those phone number, or whose phone number that is, or whatever the other information is. Information that can be recalled from long-term memory sometimes needs to go to short-term memory. So basically, if you want to think about this like a computer, your brain has short-term memory, has long-term memory, and think about long-term memory kind of like your hard drive, right? If your computer needs to access something that's on the hard drive, it's going to take a little bit longer to get to that, find exactly where it is, and then pull that up to you. If it's information that you use repetitively or frequently, it goes to RAM, random access memory. And so that information can be recalled quickly. And so your brain has to go through the process of finding where it's located in the hard drive space, and then move that to the RAM, the random access memory, to kind of the short-term memory. So it can remember that and pull that out in a quick type manner. The information, again, is given meaning through elaborate rehearsal. So as you're rehearsing, again, that phone number, you rehearse it and you give meaning to it. That's John's phone number. I need to remember John's phone number because John is important to me. Elaborate rehearsal involves the process of linking new information in a meaningful way to information that's already stored in your long-term memory. Another example would be you could remember the lines of a play and the dialogue by repeating it over and over again, but then also relating that to experiences that you've had in your own life. That will help to give that dialogue further meaning because you can relate it to something that you already have in your long-term memory. You're making those connections. Elaborate rehearsal is more effective than maintenance rehearsal for remembering new information, as it helps to ensure that the information is encoded well. Again, this is a deeper level of information processing because you're connecting those to something that you already have. You already have in your long-term memory. You're making those connections. Now, that was kind of the deep dive into why and how memory works. Now, us as martial arts instructors, what do we do with that information? Right? How do we get our students to, what meaning does this actually have for us? How do we get our students to move that information that we just taught them from their short-term memory through the working memory so they can complete the task of doing the form or their self-defense move or that submission or whatever it is, and then furthermore move that information into their long-term memory? Couple key things. Number one, we have to remember that short-term memory lasts about up to 30 seconds. So as you're going through and doing those demonstrations of the moves, 30 seconds. So if you give them, let's link this in. So we have 30 seconds linked with about 7 things plus or minus 2. And so we link in 30 seconds duration with about 7 brand new things. We need to keep our explanations and the chunks of information that we give them shortened, right? So maybe we give them only 2 or 3 moves to work on, and we explain that or demonstrated that in such a way, or we repeat that demonstration throughout that time, and we say, okay, go. And we give them just 2 things to focus in on, or 2 new things to add on. That will help to keep that short-term memory information in line with what the short-term memory can functionally do. It can remember 7 things plus or minus 2, and you have that information for about 30 seconds. And each time you repeat and rehearse that 30-second cycle starts over, but 30 seconds Is as long as about the 30 seconds is as long as the window of that short-term memory is, and we can give them about plus or minus 7 moves. That's max. So we want to stay a little bit further back from that. Again, maybe 2 or 3 moves at a time. We chunk the information down. It may be over the class, over the entire class, we give them a total of 7 moves. But on each individual interaction, each individual chunk that we give them about 2 or 3, leading up to a total of about 7 for the entire class. Now, of course, with this, as we've talked about and discussed on numerous times, repetition is king, right? New information needs to be repeated many, many times in order to be converted to that long-term memory. And with that repetition, like we talked about, it needs to have meaning, meaningful repetition, elaborate rehearsal. And with that, we need to connect those new things with information they already have in their long-term memory. For me, this is where the word pictures comes in. We've talked about this before, but the roundhouse kick is a dog peeing on the fire hydrant, booger flicking kick. Well, with that, those images, they can plug in, okay, that's what a dog looks like. Okay, there's a fire hydrant. I've seen a dog pee on the fire hydrant before. Yep, that's funny. Yep, I can imagine, or I can see somebody flicking a booger off their toe. That makes that a little bit more elaborate. And so we're connecting that new thing, the roundhouse kick, and we're giving them word pictures or word associations that they can use to help to connect that into their long-term memory, something that they've already have established. We're just kind of plugging and playing and tweaking or reorganizing that information that they already have available to them. On the training floor, give your students an opportunity to use active recall. So kind of give them a pop quiz. All right, so I know we just worked on this today, but I want to see you guys do it. Or we worked on this new term today. What does it mean? And then give them an opportunity to think about it, to actively recall that information. We use this when we talk about self-practice time. Okay, listen, I need you guys, we've been working on this for a while now, practice it. Okay, I'll be here, I'll help to facilitate, give you feedback. If you make some corrections, I'll be there, but really I just need you to do it. Just go through the motions. Let me see that you can do it. Think about it, actively recall that information, and then perform it or do it. Again, chunk down that information. As you give them, don't overload them. Don't overwhelm them with a huge number of different things and then expect for them to come back next time having remembered and know how to do that stuff. It's not going to happen, right? Especially if you think about the class. If you think about the class in a short-term memory type function, the class is a short-term memory. The belt in total, maybe that's the long-term memory. Right? And so to move that short-term memory into the long-term memory of the entire belt, you need to give them only a few things at a time. Again, 2 or 3 times over the entire class, maybe about 7 things. And then as you are demonstrating this information, you can't demonstrate the moves, tell them what it is, and then talk about something else for 15 minutes. Or really even any longer than 30 seconds and then say, okay, go. Because they're not going to remember. It's gone. It's out of their short-term memory. So short-term memory is that's where all the information processing is going to be at. That's where, as you give them or deliver new information to your students, it has to go through their short-term memory. So as that's happening, keep that information in mind. Give them, a short chunk of information. And keep your explanations maybe not the whole explanation is 30 seconds, but right before you say go, you need to kind of reiterate what you need them to do. Okay, here's the information. We need to do low block and middle punch. Okay, here's how I do these moves. Demonstrate them. Okay, remember, we're going to do low block and middle punch. Everybody got it? Yes, sir. Go. Right, so I did it. I gave them what the sequence is. I gave them the demonstration of what the move is, and I reiterated it. Okay, remember, low block, middle punch. Everybody got it? Yes, sir. Go. 2 moves. Of course, your demonstration, of course, will be, you'll have to actually demonstrate the moves. You can't just verbally tell them, but give them a reminder of what those moves are before you say go. Sometimes, and this happens often, for me, I feel like sometimes is I would demonstrate the move. Somebody asks a question, I'll answer their question that's related to the moves, and then I'll say go. And then by the time I've answered that person's question and I tell them to go, they've forgotten really what the purpose of that stuff is. And so I will have to go back, okay, let me re-demonstrate this. I know we just answered this question. Not that we got off topic, but I want to make sure you guys understand why we're doing this move or what it is or whatever the ins and outs of it is. Here it is again, just to make sure we're clear, now do the move. And so it kind of is a standard protocol for me. If I have to answer a question, I'll answer their question, make sure everybody's good, then I'll give like another quick run through of what I need them to do. That way it's fresh. It goes back to that short-term memory. Then they go through and do the moves. Meshkan, do you have any ways that you think that we can use or that we do use that short-term memory information? And really, this is kind of new to us. Even we researched this out, the short-term memory, long-term memory, and really that multi-story model of memory. We're doing these things by default. So, Meshkan, like I said, do you have anything that we're already doing that I haven't already talked about that links back to this?
You did mention it, but it happens naturally in martial arts that some moves are similar to other moves, or some moves are previously done and then resurface at another time. So I think linking whatever you're doing back to anything you can is very beneficial, not only for you as an instructor, but for them as students. For example, you're doing a block that you learn a block and it's chambered a certain way, and then 2 bets later you learn another block that's chambered the same way as that previous block. Well, actually physically say and verbally make the connection to something they already have long-term memory of. If you say, hey, this chamber is just like this other chamber, you're accessing and using that long-term memory to help with what you're doing right now. So being able to draw the parallels between moves, or if it's, again, something similar to something you do before, it's like do this like you would do X, Y, or Z. And again, I think that draws on that long-term memory of something they already know to help you with something that you are currently doing. So again, you mentioned that as far as bringing things back and linking information together and making it meaningful, but it's very useful for us as martial artists, but then also makes it, or for us as teachers, because it makes it so much easier for them, because like, oh, this is just like what I already know how to do. I just do this here like something else. And again, that works on that long-term memory and something you've already practiced. You've already drilled the short term and developed it into something they'll remember for a long time. And just use that to your advantage. Hey, here's this thing, boom, plug and play that one thing, and then make the tweaks necessary for whatever the new move is.
Now, with short-term and long-term memory, I'm sure that there are some exceptions to this. And let me give you for example. You can probably relatively vividly remember your very first day of school. Or you can probably remember that really negative thing that happened to you in high school. Or you can remember that time that you were fired from the job, or that you got the job, you were hired. That was one instance that happened one time. Yet somehow it's stuck with you for however long. Or that thing has transformed you in some way, shape, or form. But it happened one time. How does that work with short-term and long-term memory? Well, it links back to the feelings, right? We talked about the elaborate rehearsal. Give that meaning. So, for example, that first day of school, that was meaningful for you because it was the first time you did that stuff. Or that first day of school brought up all of these emotions, all of these feelings, or that time that you were fired from your job, or that you got hired, or when you on your wedding day, all of those extra feelings that went along with that, that helped to give that more elaborate meaning. All of that connects to something that already you already have in your long-term memory bank. And so even though that was one thing, because it was so meaningful, because it was so impactful, because of all those extra emotions that happened, that made that one thing stand out and be able to be stood out in your brain, despite it happening one time, or whatever the situation was. Because of that, extra meaning was built into that, extra feeling was built into that experience. So as you're in your class, try to shy away from making this a mundane, everyday type of experience. Yes, we want that. We want them to come back regularly. We want this to be a habit, part of their daily routine or weekly routine or however you function. But when your students are there with you, give them meaning, give them purpose, make them feel the moves, make them feel something when they come to a class with you. That will hugely impact their ability to remember their moves. Not only that, of course, as you are making them feel good about themselves, you're giving them all these extra things that will help them to continue to be your students, that will help them to grow and be better versions of themselves as well. No matter the art that you teach, doesn't matter. The information first has to transfer from short-term memory onto long-term memory. And that, again, that is the key. We need that to happen. Because if it doesn't move into long-term memory, if it's always in short-term memory, then we have to reteach and review. Well, we have to review anyways, but we have to reteach this information. And if it's not moving from short-term memory to long-term memory, nobody's progressing. They're stuck. They're stagnant. No progress is being made. Maybe you hand them a belt because you feel sorry for them, although I'd highly advise against that because that is not helpful to the student. But we need them to move that information from short-term memory to long-term memory. And us, as the instructors, we need to facilitate that. And we need to give them the information. We need to set them up for success by giving them word pictures, giving these movements extra feelings, connecting these movements with past experiences or information they already have in their long-term memory bank so that when it comes time for them to recall this information, it is easily remembered. It is in their long-term memory. Then, as they progress through the belts, just like Master Ken said, martial arts by default has this repetitious nature in it. One move builds on another move, which builds on another move, and then those things come together to make a pattern. Whether that's a takedown, whether that's a submission, whether that's a punch combination, or it's a form. It doesn't matter. It's all built on these small moves that make up these big moves. And if they can't do these small moves, the footwork, the hand positions, the eye focus, whatever it is, then they're not going to be able to put it together to make the bigger picture, which again means that they're not going to be progressing, and you are continually reteaching the same information to the same students because nobody's learning. Getting the students to move that information from short-term to long-term memory really is the key. That's the foundation of what we need to be doing. We've discussed a couple ways here, and really lots of these things we've discussed here have showed up in previous episodes. This information, I keep having to refresh what it is because it's brand new to us. This multi-story memory model, again, that was developed by Richard Atkins and Richard Sheffrin, that's new to us. We just learned about this. But this is information that we have already really been putting into practice. Now, there are some tweaks and some things that we perhaps could do to make it and improve it even further that we've talked about today, keeping those moves, the chunks of information, the sections that we give them down to about 2 over the entire class, maybe about 7. And then as we are doing our demonstration of the movement, you demonstrate, maybe you answer a question, reiterate specifically what you want your students to do, and then have them go do it. That way it's that 30-second cycle starts over, then they can go do those information, then they can have that meaningful practice. Master Ken, do you have anything to add to this information?
No, sir. I think it's good to know how it works and keep it in mind as we're teaching, but now it's just time to get out there and practice those drills, develop that short term that will turn into long term when we need it.
Yes, sir. As always, you can find us on the socials at MA Teaching Tactics, MA for Martial Arts Teaching Tactics. We are on nearly every podcast platform that you search for. In fact, if you're listening to this, very likely you're listening via audio podcast. I don't know how else, I guess it would be a video podcast, but an audio podcast. We're also on YouTube. You can find us on there just in case you're curious what we look like. Unfortunately, YouTube hasn't implemented smell-o-vision yet, so you can't tell what we smell like, but at least you can see us. You can interact with us on any number of those. Reach out to us, give us a message. We read and respond to each and every one of those messages. If you have ideas for upcoming episodes, or you want to be a part of the question and answer episode that we're doing in the near future, let us know. Let us answer some questions for you. If you have a particular issue that you're dealing with, we'll be more than happy to help you out. Until next time, I'm Chris Bean.
And I'm Chris Kent.